2017, a time that brought us many of the greatest indie horror games, with cult classics like Bendy and the Ink Machine, Hello Neighbor, and even Tattletale having released around this time. However, there was always one game from this era that was never really that big of a deal to me, and that was Little Nightmares. With me only getting my first exposure to the game just a few months ago, and I've fallen deep into the fandom, watching plenty of Let's Plays, animations, and this. But with Little Nightmares 3 having just released, I figured now was the perfect time to revisit the entire series and review each game individually. So without further ado, buckle up and subscribe as I recap the Little Nightmares series so far.
Top of the morning, ladies. My name is Jacksepticeye and welcome to Little Teeny Tiny Little Small Nightmares.
How's it going, Dazzlers? Welcome back to Daz Games, and we are back with Little Nightmares.
Hello everybody, my name is Markiplier and welcome to Little Nightmares.
In Little Nightmares 1, you play as 6 aboard the Maw. Now with 5 chapters to play being the prison, the lair, the kitchen, the guest area and the ladies' quarters, I'm going to review each chapter individually and rank them based on my own experience. Starting off with the prison, which I personally think is an amazing opening for the game. It's dark, quite literally. As any first chapter should, it sets the tone of the game quite well. And although it's not too challenging, I quite enjoyed playing it for the first time, with a good difficulty curve being something that's present in not only Little Nightmares 1, but Little Nightmares 2 as well. So the prison gets second place on my tier list. And the lair keeps up the quality of chapter 1, but kind of feels like more of the same. I understand it's all supposed to be one game in one area, but after playing Little Nightmares 2, it makes me look down in this chapter a little bit more. But it still keeps up that overall creepiness, and I like the monster designs in this one. Even though it's basic, it's still pretty creepy, so chapter 2 will go in 5th place. The kitchen is an amazing middle point to the game, being much more challenging than the previous chapters by taking everything you've learnt so far and making you use it in the puzzles. I also personally love the kitchen environment and the chef's designs. It's possibly one of my favourites from the entire series. So overall, the kitchen is going to take 3rd place. The guest area is awesome in my opinion, with the scenery changing up once again, which is something I really like about this series. And that is the way that each area feels like its own place, although being in the same area in the grand scheme of things. Now chapter 4 has not only some of my favourite environments mirroring old Japanese houses, I fucking love Japan, but also some of my favourite enemy designs. These butler things look disgusting and I'm all here for it. And even before we make it to the Japanese housing estate, the rest of the chapter looks awesome. So for me, it's going to hit 1st place, which sadly leaves chapter 5 to go in 4th. Which doesn't mean it's bad at all, I just didn't enjoy it as much as the other chapters. My main gripe being it's the shortest of the chapters, which is kinda normal, especially in games like Bendy and the Ink Machine and even Little Nightmares 2. But chapter 5 is insanely short, as in beatable in 9 minutes short. Although I quite like how the ending is presented and looks overall, which is no surprise. Both games know how to deliver when it comes to high quality looking environments. And lastly, I think similarly to games like Five Nights at Freddy's, Little Nightmares isn't traditionally scary, and uses its puzzles and enemies to build tension alongside the environments that build up that scary atmosphere. But that's everything for Little Nightmares, and now we can get into the second game in the series. So I forgot about the DLC. We need to talk briefly about the game's DLC, Secrets of the Maw, which brings 3 brand new chapters into the game, which we'll cover now, similarly to how I covered the main game. We won't mention that I forgot this existed when originally writing the script. Chapter 1, The Depths, is an amazing chapter which I personally think aligns closer to Little Nightmares 2 than Little Nightmares 1, especially in terms of its environmental design and gameplay. I forgot about them. I forgot to mention that in the DLC you play as an entirely new character, simply known as the Runaway Boy. Now not much is known about this character as they aren't really mentioned outside of the DLC. Well, except for when 6 gets hungry. But anyways, this chapter involves you being back on the Maw, this time being in one of the flooded sub-levels, with you even spending a lot of this chapter being submerged underwater. Now this chapter is personally my favourite from the DLC. The atmosphere and vibes are fantastic, and perfectly bring together my favourite parts of Little Nightmares 1 and 2 into its gameplay and puzzles. Now chapter 2, The Hideaway, keeps up the momentum from chapter 1. Starting off, we have an amazing opening set piece, and although it's mostly draped in fog, that just makes it all the more ominous, and we even have a gameplay segment that somewhat mirrors the mannequins from Little Nightmares 2. You have to carry this big light bulb through a pitch black room whilst evading the creature. Now, as the middle chapter for every game in this series goes, Chapter 2 is almost the perfect middle point for the DLC. So it takes the second spot on my rankings, leaving Chapter 3, The Residence, in the last spot. Now, it's nowhere near bad, and is most definitely the best ending chapter to come out of this series. Now, as to be expected based on Little Nightmares 1 and 2, this chapter is much less gameplay focused, instead tying the story together and leaving the chapters shorter as a result. But The Residence doesn't suffer from this fate, and I do love it for that. This is because without a lot of the puzzles, it's really fast paced at points, so it ruins the gameplay experience for me. But one of the standout moments for me, once again, takes place in the dark, with these little shadow guys running at you and needing to be repelled with the flashlight. Scenes like this in games are always the most intense to me, and I don't even know how to describe why. But all in all, the DLC is incredibly strong gameplay wise and holds up the quality of the first game, whilst improving it with smaller elements of the second. And now that we're on the topic, what about... Who the hell could be calling me this, like... Right, call for Striker. What? Only 7% of the audience is subscribed? The people at home should definitely subscribe? What the hell are you on about? So Little Nightmares 2 is actually a prequel to the first game, with the protagonist being Mono this time around, as you even find a young Six from the first game, who you take with you as you go on an adventure spanning across 5 different chapters, being the forest, the school, the hospital, the Pale City, and lastly, the Signal Tower. Starting off, we have the wilderness, which as the game's opening chapter is pretty simple, with you waking with Mono, breaking into a council house and releasing the child locked in the basement, before being hunted down by the owner of said house, who you'll eventually... Yeah, there wasn't really a reason to do that. We did kind of break into his house, to be honest. But I quite enjoyed Chapter 1, so it gets 5th place on my rankings, which by no means makes this a bad chapter. It's phenomenally put together, I just kind of prefer the other one. Now, the next chapter is The School, which is one of my favourites actually, and as suggested by the name, we enter a twisted schoolhouse in this one, with the main plot being to rescue Six, who's kind of abducted right at the beginning of the chapter. Now, this one was very intense in comparison to the first chapter, especially some of the scenes where that fuck-ass teacher is extending her neck and chasing you down. Why does she have to do that? Oh, and those disgusting little children decide to stand up and try to jump me. Leave me alone! However, with all of this in mind, this chapter is happily going to take the second spot on my rankings. Now, Chapter 3, The Hospital, is arguably the hardest and longest in the entire game. Now, fresh off the back of saving Six and marching further into the Pale City, we enter the hospital, which in terms of horror I'd say is the scariest chapter, and the ambience is really unmatched by the rest of the game. Now, one part I and a lot of people dislike about this chapter is the goddamn mannequins. They remind me of the glam rock endos from Security Breach, just a lot worse in my opinion. In essence, there are certain areas of this chapter where you'll have to evade these mannequins. They can be frozen in place by shining your flashlight on them. On stream, I somehow cheesed this and did it second try.
Right.
Now overall, Chapter 3 is pretty damn good, and will ironically go in 3rd place. Now the next chapter is the Pale City, and this one was great. The puzzles kind of peak in difficulty here in my opinion, and the introduction of the TV mechanic makes these puzzles more interesting to complete, and this was arguably the chapter I most struggled with. Also, the introduction and overall story of the Thin Man was quite interesting to me. I wish I wasn't spoiled to me, as it likely would have had more of an impact, but it's overall told to us pretty well. Now, the major thing I like about this chapter is the environments, as the backgrounds from every chapter in this game all look exceptional, but something about the Pale City is just so amazingly done. It gives us that perfect sort of ambience you'd expect from the penultimate chapter, even establishing the radio tower as this looming threat in the distance, and so Chapter 4 is definitely top of my rankings. Even though Chapter 5 is in 4th place, similarly to Chapter 1, it's not bad at all. In fact, it's great with the story it's presenting and the ending that I'm sure you already know. I hate 6. But the Signal Tower is very simple, especially in comparison to the last 3 chapters, but even with its simplicity, I thoroughly enjoyed Chapter 5, and it's clear that a lot of effort and passion was put in here. And then Six killed fucking Mono, because she's a I hate that Six. I hate Six. She's a Anyways, Very Little Nightmares is a mobile puzzle solving game which came out shortly before Little Nightmares 2. This time around you play as the Raincoat Girl, who if you couldn't tell has some similarities in design to 6 from Little Nightmares 1, which is intentional as they do play an important part in 6's backstory, but that's something we can get into later. For now though, we can discuss the gameplay, but firstly let's mention the elephant in the room. The game is in 2D. Yes, rather than 3D like other games in the series, Very Little Nightmares is actually a 2D game, although it keeps the basic nature of being a puzzle game having to avoid weird spooky creatures. The game also functions on a grid system, so to move around and interact with objects you just have to tap on them. Now I'll admit one thing, I haven't played Very Little Nightmares for myself, so we'll not be ranking the chapters here. The game is split up into 6 main levels with a bunch of sub-levels in between rather than 5 chapters like most of the main games in the series. But I do want to talk about how the game actually looks visually, as I think Little Nightmares is certainly renowned for its visuals. Take the Pale City with the radio tower view in the second game as a big example. But I think that Very Little Nightmares is a little generic looking, although I do like how it actually looks. I'm also not the biggest fan of the enemy designs, and I think that a lot of them are missing that classic Little Nightmares charm to them that enemies like the Janitor, the Guest, and more from the other games all had. But my favourite looking character here is definitely the Butler. He's creepy. But with what Very Little Nightmares lacks in gameplay, it certainly makes up for in story. And it adds a lot of emotional weight to 6 wearing the raincoat in the back half of Little Nightmares 2 as well as in the first game. However, similar to the Runaway Boy, I do wish we got to see a little bit more of the Raincoat Girl. But the game's ending does make that a little bit difficult. Now that we've covered Little Nightmares 1, Very Little Nightmares, and the second game, there's only one more to talk about, and that is Little Nightmares 3. And I'm going to be entirely honest with you, I do not like Little Nightmares 3, and I think after such a long wait, it's kind of disappointing. But before we get into all of my complaints, let's briefly recap the full game. Starting with the fact there is only 4 chapters in this game compared to the usual 5. Now this time around we play as 2 entirely new characters, being Low and Alone, with us having to explore Necropolis, the Candy Factory, the Carnival, screw it, welcome to Caraval, the greatest show by land or by sea. Then the last chapter is the Institute. Now delving into the chapters themselves, a lot of them feel a little bit samey in my opinion, but that's something we'll also talk about later. For now though, Necropolis is an abandoned city, completely destroyed by this ugly mug. Meet the baby, the first major antagonist of this game, and comparatively to other first antagonists, this one was pretty creepy looking, reminding me of Sid's dolls from Toy Story. But after a few encounters, we managed to escape and find this mirror which takes us over to the Candy Factory. Another pretty cool looking place, although in a lot of these cinematic shots it feels like something is missing. Like going back to the Pale City in Little Nightmares 2, all of these cinematic shots had a focus, with that being the Signal Tower building up as the final chapter of the game. But obviously a majority of the locations in Little Nightmares 3 aren't connected to one another. There isn't a focus point for the devs to build up in the background, and I think that's what's missing here. Because these shots are cool and all, but feel a little bit empty and unfocused. Now in the Candy Factory, our main enemy is the Supervisor. This ugly spider character isn't much of a threat if I'm being honest. We kinda crush her at the end of the chapter, make our escape once again through the mirror. Also, I like to point out the very subtle foreshadowing throughout the game that something is different about Alone. They consistently have issues traveling through the mirror, and we'll see why later. But welcome to Caraval, guys. I know it doesn't seem like a circus yet, but give it time. Now, during the wait for Little Nightmares 3, my most anticipated area was definitely the carnival. It's one of my favourite aesthetics, and when put with the Little Nightmares style, it looks amazing. I just wish we got more of it. But sadly, Chapter 3 is possibly the most disconnected chapter out of all of them, as well as from the series as a whole. There was a point where we find a shattered mirror, and I think that the chapter should definitely have just ended here. Personally, I would have preferred to either spend more of Chapter 3 in the carnival, or have the entire game take place across the carnival, which would have been better for keeping a consistent aesthetic like we saw in previous games. But this chapter ends with us escaping in a hot air balloon that eventually crashes and lands us in the Institute, which is a pretty bog standard chapter and definitely the longest ending we've had so far in the series. The main villain of this chapter is this big head and the hands, kinda reminding me of Arnim Zola from the MCU, but I do really want to talk about the ending here, as it's one of my favourites from across the series. So once again, we reach a mirror at the end of the chapter, and upon going through it, Alone is thrown back out, and then we get the reveal that the game's been building up to this entire time. Alone is not real. Between each chapter we've seen low and padded rooms common of insane asylums, and in the last flashback he's playing with a doll-like version of Alone. Alone is simply Lo's imaginary friend manifested by the powers of the Nowhere. But for right now, this is the end, and it's time to talk about my very negative opinions of this game. Bear in mind, I played it release night, so I was expecting glitches, but nowhere near to this extent. Starting off, this game keeps the issue of horrific depth perception. During my initial playthrough, there are an uncomfortable number of times that I died because of this. I shot that. Oh, for fuck's sake! And because of how dark the game is, the depth perception feels 10 times worse. And, oh, fuck! Honestly. The depth perception immediately. See, even Past Striker agrees with me. My next complaint though is how horrific the multiplayer system works. I don't have bad internet, my friend who I was playing with on stream doesn't even have that bad of internet. There is no reason why the game should keep disconnecting every 5 damn minutes. Go! Why did it not open?
I don't think I've pushed at the right part.
You've lost connection to the other player. My initial stream was about 4 hours long, however nearly an hour of that was spent in the menus because the game kept booting us out. And even when the multiplayer did work, we still had issues like broken animations just not playing, and sometimes characters would just completely freeze, the game would completely desync. And it got so bad to the point where for the first time ever, I got so irritated on stream that I had to step back and end the stream to go and calm down. I'm just gonna end stream, I'll do this tomorrow and give up. But my biggest complaint here is definitely the unoriginality. I pointed this out multiple times during my first playthrough, and a lot of the puzzles are almost copy and paste from Little Nightmares 2. Even the story between Lo and Alone just kind of feels very, very similar to 6 and Mono. There are multiple points like when Lo hugs Alone where it's like, we've been here before. We've done this, and that's what a lot of Little Nightmares 3 feels like. For example, the middle part of the carnival feels like a rehash of Little Nightmares Chapter 4 with the guests, which certainly left me and my friend who I was playing with very disappointed after the stream ended, and I'd go out on a limb to say that Little Nightmares 3 is the worst game in the series. It's a really buggied and unoriginal mess of a game that doesn't feel connected to the rest of the series at all. However, Reanimal, developed by the original team who no longer works on Little Nightmares, looks fantastic, and I personally think this is how Little Nightmares 3 should have been, as a true evolution on the formula while still feeling like Little Nightmares. But that is all from me today. But I have one more announcement for you before we finish this video, and that is on November 16th, I'll be publishing the first book in my series called Portals. Now, it is a sci-fi fantasy series, and if you're interested in those genres, then it's perfect for you. However, if you want to have a little feel of what the world building is going to be like and my style of writing, then I have posted 5 of the chapters early in my Discord, which you can join through the link down in the description. But for now, subscribe, like, and I'm gonna go cry myself to sleep over Alone being not real. So, good night everyone.